Now, I know it is such a complicated issue and topic, and we don't have a lot of time to discuss it, but when we look at abuse within the Catholic Church, from your studies over the decades, why did it happen, and what allowed it, do you think, to continue to happen? What were some of the main factors?
Now, abuse happens when people are in positions of power and they exercise that power by means of any kind of violence. And in our case, if we talk about sexual abuse against minors, it is sexual violence. So for whatever reason, and there are many, clergy and non-clergy abuse their power, abuse the trust with which people encounter them, children, youth, and their parents and their friends and their teachers, and they abuse sexually. They satisfy their own sexual desires, but also other desires like closeness, like feeling important in other person's lives, like dominating others. Unfortunately, this is present in all human beings and also in clergy. And why it continued is the other question, and maybe even the more important, because in human beings there is evil, and we sin and we commit crimes, even if there are commandments and even if there are laws. And you will never eradicate that, you will never abolish it completely. However, we could do, and we could have done much more in the Church by following up on those allegations properly, by committing to the laws of the Church and of the state or the governments respectively, and to stop shifting people around who have abused and of whom bishops and provincials of religious congregations knew what they had done. But this did not happen, and I honestly, I believe that there is a danger that this is still going on.
Some people, I've heard them say, in the Church, out of the Church as well, that the issue is close to being resolved. The Church has been dealing with it over the past number of years, facing up to the reality and confronting their sins. But when you look at large parts of the world, Brazil and Africa and Asia, we're not hearing as many stories of scandals coming out of there. And as you just alluded to, that you suspect that maybe cover-ups are still going on there today.
Yeah, I fear that this is not only true for African or Asian countries, or Latin American for that matter. I fear that this is still in some parts, for example, of Europe, and even North America going on. However, I got reports recently from one Asian country in particular, where the Catholic population is a minority, as almost everywhere in Asia, but a sizable minority. And I heard shocking reports about what is going on there in terms of how priests live with youth that they train to become then themselves seminarians and later on priests, probably. And nobody is supervising them. And you can only imagine what in some places, not everywhere of course, but in some places, we will still hear about abuse committed by clergy and religious. And unfortunately, this is far from over. And I would warn everybody who thinks that this is done with. In the North American, in the Western European or Northern European area, Central European, we are fed up with it because it's stuck with us for 30, 40, 20 years. However, in other parts of the world, we have not yet started to talk about it.
From your studies, you discovered that the average age of a priest who abuses is 39. Why that age, do you think?
Probably, in all probability, there are many factors, and one is the one that I mentioned earlier, that people come into positions of power and they are at the same time also somehow empty or growing empty in their own spirituality, in their own rootedness in their ministry. They get fed up, they are frustrated because life is approaching, and they are looking for their satisfaction. And one reason why they abuse is that with minors of age, you think you will get away with it easily. You can threaten them, you can dominate them, you can exercise your power more easily than with an adult person. And so one of the reasons is that you can abuse of them in a way that you think you will not be discovered so easily.
You think that you're untouchable.
And this is one of the things that is connected also with the culture in the Catholic Church, that priests have been considered untouchable and still are in some areas of the world like that.
And when we look at civil law, canon law, and then one's own responsibility morally, ethically as a Christian, has there been this kind of culture and thinking in the church, some priests and nuns thinking, I'm accountable to nobody, just I'm only accountable to God?
Yeah, this is at the bottom of the behavior of many within the church, not only clergy, I have to say, that because you belong to the church, to the people of God, and you are responsible only to God, you can forget about and disregard all the other levels of supervision, of law, and of accountability within the church and outside the church. And these institutional factors is something that we at our Safeguarding Institute at the Pontifical Gregorian University are now investigating also in greater depth.
This topic is very complex, and the Church has wrestled with it for so long. This interview is just an excerpt of a much longer conversation touching on many aspects of the problem, including what happens to those priests found guilty of crimes against the vulnerable.
In most cases, I believe those who continue being priests have a right for some support by the church. Of course, that is quite limited, but it is not as if you can just cast out people, even if they are criminals, even if they are the worst criminals in the world. You have to take care of them. That is also some part of the responsibility of the church.
You can watch Colm's full interview with Father Zollner on the EWTN News In Depth Facebook page. It's a conversation full of insights from an expert who has studied this difficult issue for years.